Diablo 4 is a min-maxer's dream. Analyzing gear and the micro differences between stats is enough to keep anyone busy for days. But one man's dream is another man's nightmare. Blizzard doesn't do a great job with the tool tips and summary screens, and figuring out everything by hand is enough to frustrate anyone to the point of pulling out your hair. That is, if you have hair. Greetings Internet, DDA here, and I've wanted to make a fire-based Xfals build for a long time now. The problem is, when you go and you try to make a fire-based Xfals build using all the damage over time, the burning effects, the information out there on what is the best to maximize Xfals is really limited, so I knew I needed to take some time and calculate the values myself if I wanted to make intellectual decisions on what is the best way to maximize Xfals. You do pretty much need a math degree to min-max in this game, but lucky for you, I actually do have a degree in math, and I use my degree at work to perform studies and do statistical analysis. Now, I wouldn't consider myself an expert in statistical analysis, but like a good friend at my work says, I know enough to be dangerous. So I'm going to take that knowledge, apply it here, and create some studies that can help us make accurate conclusions on what these skills are doing behind the scenes. So the first question you want to ask yourself is, how many samples do you need? Sampling is pretty much a whole science in itself, and there are people who actually, their whole job is just how many samples do we need? With various populations and various studies, there's always this balance between time and the number of samples. In an ideal world, we would just have a billion samples that would give us the most accurate conclusion, but you know, this is reality and we can't have a billion samples. And while I was performing these studies, that became very evident. It took a long time to calculate all these values and take all these samples. All in all, I probably spent about 2 weekends. This video is a long time coming. I've been working on this video for about 2 weeks now. And just that goes to show that there is this intricate balance between time and sampling. We need enough samples. That way we're not introducing too much variance in the data and then therefore kind of giving us a chance to perform inaccurate conclusions, to have inaccurate conclusions. But we need to be reasonable with our time and not take 10 years to perform one study. So to answer the question of how many samples we need to make accurate conclusions in these studies, we're going to use something from statistics called the central limit theorem. Now there's a lot of mumbo jumbo here, but to break it down into simple layman's terms, what this is saying is that if you take a bunch of studies and means, if you calculate a bunch of means, and then you plot those means, as you increase your sample size, you are going to approach a normal distribution, regardless of the distribution of the samples. And if you look at this being done, if you look at several studies of this being done, you will see a normal distribution begin to form at, you'll start seeing it around 10 samples. You'll see it better at 20, even better at 30, and so on and so forth, until you get to about 100 samples, you can clearly see a normal distribution. And the magical number of 30 is often debated in the statistical community about where it came from, or even if its relevance at all. A lot of people who are just getting into statistics throw out this magic number, sample size of 30. That's when you approach a normal distribution. It really depends, and this number is thought of to come from the central limit theorem, because again, the central limit theorem is independent of where the data is coming from. It will always approach a normal distribution when you're graphing the means. So that's where this magical number 30 is coming from. It's a good rule of thumb, but I think the important point is that we really see normal distributions solidly appear at 100 samples. So what you need to do is, we use this magical number of 30 as kind of a baseline, but then you really need to analyze the data and ask yourself, do I need more samples? So the rule of 30 is a good starting point, but it's definitely not a golden rule. It is not an end-all be-all rule. It's just a starting point to get us started. So we're going to use this number of 30, but then the question becomes, what is a sample? Especially when you're talking about an RPG game, how do we quantify what a sample actually is? For skills like Meteor, this was really easy. A sample is one hit of the ability. Very simple. Or for something like Firewall, again, it does damage over 8 seconds. One cast of Firewall, well, that will be one sample. Now, for skills such as Incinerate, it gets a little weird because it's a channeled ability. So I kind of just took what I thought would be an average amount of time, and I did the same with Hydra, because Hydra lasts for 10 seconds. I just kind of took what I would consider a average length of time that you would attack an enemy with this, like an elite mob, and I figured that would be around 5 to 10 seconds. Like, you would attack an elite mob for about that long. So I considered that one sample for skills like Incinerate or like Hydras, and I'll explain that more as I get into the data that I collected. So when I started testing the Firebolt enchantment, I wanted to get a lot of data because I wanted to really understand a trend and start to maybe kind of extrapolate conclusions to other abilities and other skills based on the Firebolt enchantment. Plus, I wanted to get a lot of data on the Firebolt enchantment because the Firebolt enchantment is most commonly used with Xfals. So I wanted to make sure that my numbers were on point with Xfals with the Firebolt enchantment. The other thing I wanted to see if there was a difference between using different abilities with the Firebolt enchantment. Maybe there was some effect that the skill that was being used with the Firebolt enchantment, the base lucky hit of that skill had some kind of effect on the lucky hit chance of the Firebolt enchantment. So I wanted to test out multiple skills, and I ended up getting a lot of data. So this is all the data that I accumulated. It's very busy, but I'm going to break it down for you. So I broke it up into runs, and like I said, I kind of targeted 30 sample size each time. So in the case of Firebolt enchantment, it was the number of hits. So my first 3 runs, I didn't really expect much of a difference. I marked down the skill that I used also, and I'm going to make this spreadsheet open in public, and I'm going to put it in the description. So, check out the spreadsheet and look at the data yourself. So I didn't expect a difference to start, but then when I noticed using Fireball and Frostbolt here, I saw a increase in the far right hand side is the calculated base lucky hit chance per hit. So it's like an accumulative lucky hit chance for the total hit. Okay. I also calculated it per tick, per burning tick, because from my testing, what I found was Xfals can trigger whenever burning triggers, whenever a burning tick happens, burning ticks twice a second. So as I go on and talk about the data, a way that we can normalize this data and make it easily comparable is to talk about the base per tick, which is this column here, because everything will tick at the same rate, whereas some skills burn for 8 seconds, burn for 3 seconds, so normalizing things per hit is actually kind of not ideal because it will take more time for you to see the results of that lucky hit. So that's why I think, you'll see in subsequent tabs, I actually stopped recording the per hit values because I realized that the per tick lucky hit values were far more relevant. And plus, if you have a low or a high lucky hit per tick, that's something you visually see. It's something you visually see per time. So I thought it was much better. But I'm calculating, this is the first study I did, so I'm calculating a bunch of different things, just trying to figure out what I want to track and how that's going to, translate into my conclusions. So again, I started out with Fireball, then I did Fireball, and I switched to Frostbolt, and I just wanted to see if there's an effect. I saw a bump in the base lucky hit, so then I just did with just Frostbolt, and then I saw a huge bump. So, and this is what I mean about 30 sample sizes, and then you kind of have to base it on that. So I saw what I thought would maybe be an upward trend, and maybe the lucky hit is actually affecting of the skill is actually affecting the Frostbolt enchantment. So then I took a ton of data, and I just took a boatload of data because I wanted to conclude. I wanted to make sure that I had accurate conclusions and I wasn't, misinterpreting the data in any way. So what I did was I took a far range of lucky hit. Arc Lash has a lucky hit, I think, around 12% or 15% or something like that. Frostbolt is close to 40%. So you would expect that if the lucky hit had some kind of effect or the skill had some kind of an effect, it would, Arc Lash would be about half of Frostbolt. So, and then I threw in Fireball there just as good measure. So I took 2 runs of 30 and then I doubled that. So I took 4 runs of 30 per skill, and I actually threw in some lucky hit there as well. I had some runs where I did 67 lucky hit, and then I had some runs where I did just the base lucky hit, which is just Xfals attached, which is 4.2 for me. So, you can kind of see that the data is kind of all over the place. Over here is where I calculated my my average based on the skill used. So we had an average per hit of 25. You can see Arc Lash is higher here than the Frostbolt. And then likewise, Fireball here is even higher, which doesn't really make sense. And then Arc Lash ended up being, the highest in a certain run. And then, Fireball stayed pretty consistent. Whereas, Frostbolt was kind of all over the place. We had this one run that was really high. So I wasn't able to establish a trend. So based on how much Arc Lash would jump up and down, and then Frostbolt would jump up and down, like I just saw a lot of variance. I concluded based on this that there is no effect. Now, if I wanted to be more accurate in my conclusions, I could do what's called a t-test, a sample t-test, where a t-test is determining if there are different means based on the data. So I could use a t-test to more officially conclude, whether or not there's actually differences here. But, I feel confident in just looking at the data rather than just putting all this data in a mini tab or something like that. So I felt confident. So then I have a summary down here where I summarized all the data. I made sure that when I was calculating that I weighted the samples appropriately. So studies that had, a similar number, I calculated the dot ticks, and then I calculated the total number of ticks, used all that in the calculations. So the conclusion that I made for the Firebolt enchantment was that I got an average base of about 2.2% and average per hit of about 36.7%, which if you look at the Firebolt skill, you'll see that the skill itself has about a 35% lucky hit chance. So that lines up. You always want to check your data, like check it against reality. You have to do a reality check of the data. Okay, so it's always good to run numbers, make conclusions, but you always want to reality check your data, ground your data in reality, so that way you can see if anything like weird is going on, and you need to reperform some studies, or maybe you made some assumptions that weren't true, or maybe you have something that's introducing bias into your data. Like for example, if I would accidentally put on a bunch of lucky hit and didn't include that in my calculations, there could be something, that could be just throwing off all my data. So you always want to kind of reality check your data. So this makes sense. I'm getting close to 37% compared to the Firebolt skill, the 35. So this leads me to believe that basically in terms of Firebolt, that you're taking the 35 and then you're spreading that 35% chance evenly throughout the life of the burn effect. So this is going to be something, this is like setting a standard for the rest of the data. So this is what I would expect moving forward for all the other skills. And this sets a good baseline for us. So for Incinerate, I did about sample sizes of about 10 to 15 seconds per use of Incinerate. So I considered that one sample and then took my data from there. So when I took my data for Incinerate, I started to see, things to be expected. I took a total of 60 samples at, near 0 lucky hit, and 60 samples at the 70 and 30 lucky hit. So I wanted to try out different things. You can see I used Flame Scar here in my calculations. So again, if you just scroll down to the summary table here, so we got an average base of about 8.6%, and if you compare that to the skill tooltip, you would expect around a 10 or an 8% chance. So this is very expected. Again, you always want to sanity check your data. Now one thing that I did note was that the Flame Scar bolts do not apply the Firebolt burn. I was hoping that they would, because if they did, Incinerate would be above and far away probably the best skill for Xfals, but they do not apply it, and I tested that out. That's unfortunate. One curious thing, though, was that the Incinerate enchantment, and I'm not sure if this is a bug, or if it's a feature. Hey, bug, let's play the game. Bug or feature? But seriously, the Incinerate enchantment is calculating lucky hits that are way higher than Incinerate. Just double. And I ran a lot of studies. Again, 60 samples, lots and lots of samples here. Just if you look at the number of ticks, right, you could see while it's, each hit, quote unquote hit, was 8 seconds, because that's how long the enchantment lasts. So just look at the number of ticks, 500. Really, my sample sizes it's more than 30, right? So that's we're just calling a sample here one summon of the Incinerate enchantment, but it's a lot more than that. So these are very accurate percentages, calculating a percentage of 21.1%, over double, almost 2.5 times the ability of the base skill. So I don't know why Incinerate enchantment is doing this, but I can tell you this is why he's the bestest boy, because he is just triggering Xfals at a rate that is just unprecedented. For the Hydra skill, I noticed something really weird occurring when I first started to test out Hydra with, I think it's the Supreme Hydra upgrade. I was just getting nothing to trigger for Hydra. It's a little concerning. I don't know why. So I put on a boatload of lucky hit. I put on close to 80% lucky hit, and then just let the Hydra attack for 2 minutes straight. And I did not see a single activation of Xfals. And actually, for the recording of this video, I did a similar thing about a minute again, just to actually record the footage for the video. So, and I again saw no lucky hit triggers, no Xfals triggers. So I think that, and again, feature or bug, I don't know whether or not this is a bug, but the Hydra burn from the upgraded Hydras are not triggering lucky hits. They're not triggering Xfals. And I think a part of me thinks that this is actually a feature, that this is by design. I'm not sure though, but I can tell you that the Hydra with the Firebolt enchantment is working, and working it very well. For this, to test it out, I allowed the Hydra to attack for 6 seconds, because again, I thought that was kind of an average that you would see. Well, it's actually 6 seconds is the length of the Firebolt enchantment burn. So I wanted to see kind of like a fully stacked out Firebolt enchantment with a single Hydra, what it would be, and I got 9.8%. So again, this is going to be multiplied, like if you have multiple Hydras, you have the Hydra enchantment, this is going to kind of multiply out. So really, really high here from just a single Hydra. Adding an extra Hydra down will just send this much, much higher. So based on that, I think that there's a chance, yep, right here I list Hydra burn cannot proc Xfals. There's a chance that this is actually built in, and they chose to do this because if the Hydra was proccing so well with the Firebolt enchantment alongside of its own lucky hit. Potentially, it could be too good. I'm not sure. But all I can tell you is that Hydra itself alone is not proccing any lucky hits. You have to use the Firebolt enchantment. But when you do use the Firebolt enchantment, you're getting a really high trigger rate because the Hydras are attacking so quickly and so many. So for Meteor, this is the one I was most interested in because I had anecdotally observed that Meteor had a really high trigger rate of Xfals, so I wanted to quantify it and see where it fell in my conclusions. So again, I used just a base of 1 hit of Meteor. Meteor has a 3-second burn associated with it and a 40% lucky hit. So I would expect the trigger to be around, say, slightly over 5%. So we wanted to see how that would translate in the data. And in the data, I saw something around there. I was getting close to 5%. I got 4% for this run. So maybe that run was just a little low. It could be a little low here. And then likewise, when I added the Firebolt enchantment, I did see an uptick to about a 5.5%. So that kind of led me to believe even more that Meteor is kind of nestling around slightly higher than 4, not exactly 5, because you would expect Firebolt to increase it a little bit. I also wanted to test the Meteorites. So I tested the Meteorites. They cannot proc Firebolt enchantment. So that's expected, compared to the Flame Scar. You'd expect that, since Firebolt enchantment says skills, direct damage from skills, and a Meteorite and a Flame Scar Firebolt is not a skill. It's like an extra ability that's being triggered. So that's fine, but the Meteorites have a burn effect, and so what I did was I actually would just summon Meteor right next to the dummy, and then just only let the Meteorites hit, and I would kind of figure in how many Meteorites were hitting, and then use that into my calculations, triggering multiple hits. If multiple Meteorites hit, I would factor that in. So I got around 1.5, 1.4%. So if I just scroll down to my conclusions, I also ran enchantment runs because, again, with how drastic the difference was between the Incinerate enchantment and Incinerate skill, I wanted to see if there were big differences in the other enchantments with these triggers. So I didn't see a big difference at all. You could just kind of attribute this difference to variance. I only had a 60 sample size, so they're close enough, 87% within each other, not the drastic change that we saw with Incinerate. So that's fine. 4.5, 4.6% with Meteor to be expected there. It's a little bit lower than the tooltip would suggest, but there may be something going on, like in Hydra's example, where 0% is translated into the burning effect. There could be some percentage that's translated for Meteor because there's a direct damage element and then the burning damage element to it. And then Meteorites are getting about 1.4% lucky hit, so a little bit lower than Firebolt. But there are 3 of them, and all 3 of them can hit the same target. So based on this, it's pretty good. It's a pretty solid chance. So then for Firewall, again, we just use a single cast is considered a sample. So that's between 8 and 3 seconds, 8 for the base skill and 3 seconds for the enchantment. Now I noticed, again, with the use of this skill, and you can also see that my samples are getting less because I'm at this point, I feel like I have enough data that I can start making kind of assumptions about how the data is supposed to look. So as long as I'm kind of confirming what the data, if I'm kind of confirming what I would expect the lucky hit to be, and I don't see anything out of wacky, out of the ordinary, I can just make the conclusion that this is, what the lucky hit is being represented. So we would expect that Firewall lucky hit to just be spread evenly throughout the length of Firewall, and we see that about 1.7% per tick, at around 17 ticks or 7 ticks for the enchantment, And likewise, the enchantment and skill are pretty much dead even. Barely any difference between the two, just typical variance there. But, you know, Firewall being put kind of low on the list here. And you can see that while Firewall does a lot of damage, it does not trigger Xfals very much. And if you want to trigger Xfals with Firewall, pretty much the only way you can do it is just stacking like 1 billion Firewalls, which Firewall builds do, but just it goes to show you how low the chance actually is. So as a final test and the most difficult skill to test in this entire study was Inferno. Inferno is unique in that if you hit it just right, you can actually have Inferno hit multiple times and trigger its burn multiple times on the same target. So that needs to be factored in as well, which is maybe why it has such a low lucky hit chance to begin with. But it does its damage over 8 seconds, and the lucky hit is just really, really, really low. You know, 0.33% per tick of burning. Really, really, really low here. So, you know, originally I thought, okay, well, you know, Inferno, you'll add it into builds for mana, and then you'll get some extra lucky hit triggers too. Yeah, you will, but just not really that many. So to summarize the data and all the data of the video, the most important point with this is, of course, what are the best skills to trigger Xfals? So we took a lot of data. And at the top here, I wanted to note that this data was taken December 2023. You know, like I said, I took a while to accumulate this data. So, and, you know, this could change. They could come out with hot fixes, updates. They could realize that Hydra burn is not triggering Xfals. They could realize that there's a bug where Incinerate enchantment is triggering double 2.5 times Incinerate lucky hit. Bestest Boi. They could realize that and fix it. Not sure. But as it stands, rank 1 is going to be your Incinerate enchantment. Crazy, crazy amount of lucky hit. Xfals triggers. I think I got close to 100 Xfals triggers. Actually, one time that Incinerate enchantment triggered for the 8 seconds, I saw 6 Xfals procs. 6 Xfals procs in 8 seconds. Crazy. So really, really high lucky hit chance there. Hydra with Firebolt is coming in at number 2. Just kind of showing, you know, the difference between maybe how you can develop builds between being single target and being AoE based. Because one of the things that is notorious for fire builds is that we're bad in boss fights. Well, Hydra with Firebolt enchantment has a really high lucky hit chance with Xfals. So if you build an AoE fire build, and then you can kind of switch to a Hydra build during the boss fight, and have really high single target because you have really high lucky hit chance. So just some food for thought. Incinerate coming in at number 3. You know, Incinerate is often thought of as a really bad skill, but given, you know, it takes the 1 and 2 slot for lucky hit for Xfals. So yes, it's not a great skill, but if you're building an Xfals build, maybe there's something there. So then next up, we got all the meteors coming in at 4 through 6. Firebolt enchantment itself is coming in at 7. And then Firewall is lagging behind at 8 and 9. And then the meteorites with shattered stars at 1.4. Inferno, just terrible at the 0.3 at the very end. And then I just wanted to know that, again, I don't know if this is bugged, but Hydra plus Summon Hydra is literally a 0% chance to trigger any Xfals. So I hope you like this data-driven video that we had for calculating Xfals lucky hits. Again, I wanted to do this myself, like my own analysis, because I wanted to create an Xfals fire build, so I knew I needed to run this data, and I just wanted to share all this data and my conclusions with you all. If you like this video, please hit that like, please hit subscribe for the best data analytics, and the best build analysis guide videos that we have in Diablo 4. And as always, turn your dial to Random Number Gaming for weekly updates for Diablo 4.